I'm speaking today with Melissa Stockwell, who's a two-time Paralympian. She competed in 3 swimming events at the 2008 Paralympic Games and in 2016 in the inaugural paratriathlon event. She was also a U.S. Army officer who served in Iraq, and it's a pleasure to speak with you, Melissa. Thanks for taking the
Yeah,
time.
thank you.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience, I guess, in Iraq and maybe how or why you decided to join the Army.
Yep. So I decided to join the Army. Pretty short and sweet. I love our country. I always have, and at a young age, felt pretty passionate about the flag and the red, white, and blue, and wanted to kind of give back. So that led me to joining the military and wearing that uniform with a flag patch on my shoulder. So I got deployed over to Iraq in March of 2004, and I was over there very briefly. And my job was transportation, so leading a whole bunch of vehicles from one point to the next, really on the road a lot, which is not the best place to be over in the Middle East. And on April 13th of 2004, the vehicle I was in was struck by a roadside bomb, which, to make a long story pretty short, ultimately resulted in the loss of my left leg above the knee. So came back to the United States, did all my rehab at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, and kind of figuring out my new normal.
Yeah. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the experience, I guess, of trying to come to terms with what happened with loss of your leg.
So I was 24 years old. So, I'm 24. I had lived 24 years of my life with both of my legs, and then in an instant, one is gone. So it's not like I had a thought process behind it. It's not like it was a choice. It was this very traumatic event, obviously, that happened. So, I've always been a very optimistic person, and being at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. So at the time, that's where all the wounded soldiers went from Iraq and Afghanistan. And I was surrounded by all these other soldiers who had gone through all these traumatic events as well. And many of them had lost way more than one leg. So many of them had lost 2 legs, maybe an arm and a leg. They had lost their eyesight. So whenever I, felt bad about my own injuries, I could look around and honestly think about how lucky I was, because all I had lost was one leg. I still had my eyesight, my mind, 3 good limbs. So, it really helped put things in perspective. So, I actually accepted the loss. I moved on pretty quickly. Just in my mindset was, well, my leg's not going to grow back. Let's go and see what I can do with, let me go out and show to myself how much I can still do with just one leg. So of course it's challenging. I'm missing my leg, but I think I was just putting things in perspective. I don't think I could say enough about how important that was.
Right. And so it sounds like the fact that you were surrounded by other people who also experienced significant trauma was facilitative in helping you accept or come to terms with what happened.
Absolutely. Because not only did I have peers there to, when we're down in physical therapy, trying to regain the strength that we've lost for so long. Not only do I have the encouragement of others that are around me, there's so much camaraderie in the military, and then even more so when when you're sitting next to the guy who lost his arm, 2 weeks prior to you, like that camaraderie, like it's even stronger than ever at a military hospital. So not only did I have my peers to, encourage each other, and, when you have bad days, well, they understand the bad days. So you can kind of like heal together, but also to put those things in perspective. So yes, that was a crucial part of my recovery.
Right. So I guess before you went to Walter Reed, do you have any recollection of what specifically happened, or kind of what passed through your mind after the blast occurred?
I do. Yep, I lost my leg. It was gone at this site. So it was severed pretty much. There was a combat medic about a few vehicles back. He ran up, he put a tourniquet around. I credit him with saving my life. And then it's all kind of fuzzy, but I ended up in the Baghdad emergency room for like a life-saving surgery. I was losing a lot of blood, and I woke up, and my very first thoughts, it wasn't even about my leg. I mean, there was a lot of pain, obviously. I mean, I just, lost my entire leg. So the pain, trying to deal with the pain, but the thoughts weren't, oh my gosh, my life is over. Oh my gosh, I'm only have one leg. It was almost more towards the fact of like, I knew I was going to be able to get through it. I knew I had a strong support system. I was glad it was me and not another one of my soldiers. I knew that, my parents would be by my side. So it was more just kind of, it wasn't so much about the leg. It was just about, I felt guilty that I was leaving a war zone and I got to go sit in a comfortable hospital. Granted, I didn't have my leg, but like, those are the kind of things that run through your mind as a soldier, I think.
Yeah. And so you mentioned the support. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the kinds of support that were helpful for you in terms of your recovery.
So obviously my immediate team, meaning my family, my friends. I mean, when I got to Walter Reed, I had friends that dropped everything they were doing and they flew to Walter Reed to be by my side. I mean, those things are pretty impactful, especially from the very get-go. Mm-hmm. The doctors and nurses they did everything they could to help us be comfortable. I feel like I've said it a few times now, but being in that atmosphere, going down to physical therapy and seeing someone who has lost their leg a month prior to me, but they have a prosthetic on and they're up and walking. So I'm looking at them and I'm thinking, okay, if they did that in a month, well, then that's where I'm going to be also. So like, it gives you that hope. So, the things that helped me the most was, keeping that positive mentality, surrounding myself with people that wanted me to get better, putting things in perspective and just, of course you have bad moments, but in the grand scheme of things, I feel like we were all pretty fortunate to have our lives because too many had given that ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah. So what enabled you to keep a positive mindset or perspective through, you allude to some challenges, of course. What facilitated that optimism? Was it just something you said you were optimistic? Was that sort of before the injury, and that helped you, or was it something else that helped you sort of stay positive?
I've definitely always been optimistic in my life before the injury, and always like, the glass is half full type of person. But that almost like doubled in size after I lost my leg. I feel like it's like almost like if I had a bad moment, all I had to do was look around and see others that were worse off than I was. I think in life, you think you have it so bad, but there's people that would love to have your bad days. If here I am feeling bad about myself because I'm missing my leg and I look to the hospital bed in the room next to me and he's missing both of his arms. Well, how do I get off feeling bad about one limb when he's missing two limbs? Mm-hmm. So like, it just puts things in perspective. And that's kind of followed with me my entire life, I think.
Yeah. You talked most about role models and kind of seeing other people in their recovery and what they were able to accomplish. Maybe you can elaborate on the value of those role models to your recovery.
Definitely. I think in anything in life, so especially, something as traumatic as losing a limb, it's really powerful to look towards people that have overcome those, that have come before you and overcome them. So, when I got to Walter Reed, I was the first female there. The rest were all men, which in my mind, we all wore the same uniform, similar injuries. It didn't really matter. But there was this one woman who had lost her leg, not in the Middle East, but in a car accident. But she was coming to the hospital to do her rehab. So she really became my role model because she was one of the only other females I saw. She was missing her leg like I was, and she was like wearing she was like had high heels on, and she like looked so I was just always so impressed. Like, and I'm like, okay, well, if she's where she is now, then I'm going to be where she is now. And then when I realized I wanted to be an athlete again, I would, I Googled athletes that are missing their leg, and I came up, multiple names come up, and, one of them had just completed an Ironman. The other was a Paralympic skier. And I'm like, okay, if they can do that, well, I can do. So having those role models is, huge. It's a huge part of recovery.
Right. And were you an athlete prior to your time in Iraq?
I was a big gymnast I've always been an athlete. Yes. When I was younger, gymnastics was, in the gym all hours of the day. And then in high school, I did, some pole vaulting, diving, and then college I was on the crew team. So I've always been an athlete. I'm never to the extent I am now, but definitely always an athlete.
Yeah. And I guess when you had lost your leg, did that, given how active you were, did that change how you thought about yourself as a person, as how you identified, I guess?
A little bit. I would kind of lay in my hospital bed and wonder, what was my life going to be like from here on out? I mean, was I going to be independent? Was I going to be able to walk? Was I going to be able to run, be an athlete again? So all those things run through your mind after something so drastic.
Right. And were there specific things you did to manage those uncertainties or those doubts?
I mean, you mentioned role models. That was a lot of it. I mean, obviously you have to wait for your body to heal. The hardest part for me was like waiting. Like I had to wait for my body to heal before I could get out and do anything. But finding those, role models that have gone before me, lost a leg and gone on to do these amazing athletic feats. I mean, those are the kind of things that I would sit there and read about.
Yeah. Did that provide you with motivation or inspiration, I guess?
All of the above. Yeah. I mean, probably a lot of frustration because I wanted to be there now. I didn't want to have to wait for my body to heal and then, to figure it all out. I wanted to be where they were now, tomorrow.
Yeah.
But it definitely provided hope, inspiration, motivation. Just if they can do it, well, then I can too.
Yeah. What you mentioned hope a couple times. What does it mean to you specifically?
I think it's hope is, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, it's a hope that there's probably a few different definitions, but I mean, personally, I would lay in Walter Reed and hope that I would be able to be independent. I would hope that I could, learn to run again. But I think when it comes down to it, like we're all hopeful about so many things, but you have to take actions to make them happen as well.
Right,
So
right.
I can sit here and hope that, my life ends up better with one leg, but if I don't do anything about it, well, it's never going to happen.
Sure.
So I think, first you have the hope and you have that dream of what you want to accomplish, but then you have to kind of think about how you're going to get there and what are you going to do to make it happen.
Yeah. Well, your definition is certainly consistent with some social science research on the concept of hope that's looked at injured athletes and, this idea of having a concrete sense of what one wants to achieve, the steps about how you're going to get there, and third, the belief that you can take the steps to get there.
Yeah.
And there's certainly some evidence that hope is important in the case of injury rehabilitation. So maybe you can speak to that point about some of the steps that you mentioned that were important in helping you recover physically or psychologically.
Yeah, I know that there's all the different phases. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I would say for me, first there's the shock factor. So you get there and laying in my hospital bed, almost kind of trying to process almost what just happened. Like it's the shock of, you wake up the next morning and you think your leg's going to be there and it's not, it hasn't grown back overnight. Like it's still like, this is going to be your new reality. So I think first it's the shock of, okay, like this has actually happened. And then, I imagine a lot of people go through, the grieving process of, how did this happen? Why did this happen to me? I was fortunate to have, I had brief moments, but I didn't have big weeks or months of this whole grieving process. And I think a lot of that was because of the atmosphere I was in. So I think after that grieving process, you have the acceptance. And I think, unfortunately, some people never get to that point. But, I very early on, I chose, like I made a conscious effort. Like it's a conscious choice. I mean, I chose to accept the loss of my leg. It's not going to grow back. And instead of saying, woe is me, I lost a leg, it was like, okay, all I lost is one leg. Now let's get back to living. Let's get back to seeing what's out there. So, I think for me, it was the shock factor. And then pretty soon after that, it was acceptance. And I contribute that to just the atmosphere I was in.
Yeah. Well, and again, it sounds like having, other people recovering or being in that environment was important in
It was
moving to
crucial.
the
Yeah.
acceptance. But I
Yeah.
think it's also interesting that, you mentioned you made a conscious choice that, your leg, you said several times, wasn't going to grow back, and you had to sort of decide, okay, how am I going to move forward with this? And
Yeah.
that, it sounds like that was quite intentional, would you say, or I guess
It was.
deliberate?
I mean, I could have chosen. I do. Like, I think, I do a lot of motivational speaking, and my topic is typically called the power of choice, because, we have choice every day in life. We have choices, and especially when an event like that happens to you, this obstacle comes your way, traumatic event comes your way, which they happen to all of us. Some bigger than others, but you always have a choice. Like, I could have chosen to always think about, well, what if I would have done this, or why me, and why not somebody else, but instead, like, acceptance was huge, because not only did I accept it, but that kind of helped me move past it. And
Yeah.
just, 15 years later, my life is better on the other side.
Yeah. How did it help you move past it when you made the choice to accept what had happened? What subsequent impact did that have on, I guess, behaviorally, emotionally?
I think it probably helped me see what else I could do. So after accepting it, so first step, there's a shock factor, and then accepting the loss and saying, all right, I lost my leg. My leg's not growing back. I can't wish for it back. I can't, no matter how much I want it back, it's not coming back. So what are the steps I can do to make this what I want it to be? Well, and you kind of, like, step number one is getting a prosthetic leg. Step number two is you figuring out how to use it to the best that I want to use it. And then from there, you figure out, okay, if I want to be an athlete, well, then I need to do X, Y, and Z, or step one, step two, step three. So it's almost like you put these, like, process goals where, you have these different steps that you need to get to. And that kind of, I think, by accepting the loss, it kind of opens up that door on that path towards where you want to be.
Right. Okay. So just in moving to that acceptance, then it sort of opens your mind to the possibilities of what's next. And again,
Absolutely. Yep. Possibilities of what you can do.
yeah. And when you talk about kind of laying out those different steps or those process goals, was that something you did in collaboration with sport medicine providers, family, other support, or just independently?
More so early, like, now that I'm at, like, the elite athletic level, now we have, like, sports psychologists that we work with, and our coaches. But back then, there was none of that. We did have we did have people we could talk to in the hospital, but it was my husband and I, honestly, that would sit there and think about the next steps. It was my prosthetist, the guy that makes my legs, who was actively, like, we would have these goals we wanted to do, and if they dealt with walking or running or my prosthetic, he's the one that helped facilitate that by making my prosthetic legs. But no, it was more just like laying there in bed, coming up with things that I wanted to do, and just trying to figure out how to make them happen.
Yeah. I just wanted to come back to that point about sort of you had all these things you wanted to do, but it was sort of like time. You felt like you couldn't because things just took time to heal. And I wonder if you could speak about any expectations that you might have had of recovery progressions, or sort of just any expectations in general that might have impacted your recovery and your rehabilitation.
I think it's so hard to, you see something, and you want to be there, but your body won't let you. Like, I had to recover physically before I could ever move on. And after, losing, there were so many, like, I had a lot of, I had 15 surgeries, a lot of complications, blood transfusions. Like, at one point there was an infection in my bone. They had to go in and take 6 more inches off, which set everything back. When I look back at my time, that was the most frustrating part. Dealing with it physically, because I couldn't do anything about it. Like, I feel like mentally I was there, but physically, like, I was a few steps ahead mentally, and I had to catch up physically before I could start to make these things happen. So that was the hardest part. It's almost like when someone has an injury, like, you have to wait it out, or it's not going to get better. There's really nothing you can do. So it was just like a really big injury that I had to wait out.
Yeah. And it sounds like the kind of physical recovery process was not a linear one. Would that be accurate?
No, not at all. I mean, no, it was like gradually going up, and then it took a huge dip, and then I had to go up again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so maybe, like you said that they had to, maybe you can describe again in terms of that dip, they had to make modifications to your limb, or what?
Yeah. So they did. So I was about to be discharged from the hospital and then kind of move out to this subset in the hospital complex, this other building. And I went in for like a final MRI. It's routine. They just do it before you're discharged to make sure everything just to make sure that everything's going as it should. And they found out that I had an infection in my bone, and it had traveled like 6 inches up my bone. So that night, instead of being discharged from the hospital, I went back in for surgery, and they took 6 inches off of the bone. And then you had to start the entire process over of waiting for it to heal, risk of infection, getting a new prosthetic made. I mean, everything just starts over at that point.
How did you handle that?
That was hard. It was hard. My husband, so I've been divorced and I'm remarried now, but at the time my husband was just incredible. I mean, amazing. I mean, he helped me get through it. He was by my side through it all. My parents were there as much as they could be at the hospital. I mean, we had, again, other soldiers that were there. I mean, it was nothing new to me. It was new, but it happens frequently. Like it's not an uncommon thing. So It was easy for me to find someone to, lament about it because it had happened to other people. I remember there were volunteers that came into the hospital all the time. And, that night they came in my room and they were like, "Oh, we thought you were being discharged." And I'm like, "Actually, I'm going back to surgery." And they were just the support. I mean, there's so much support there.
Yeah. Well, and again, it sounds like that was pretty instrumental, would you say, in your recovery, that you weren't kind of alone through these ups and downs, but there were people around to, just be there to help or facilitate.
Definitely. I wasn't alone. I was alone very, very few times. Yeah.
In terms of, I guess, communication, was that kind of something that, did you have kind of clear communication, I guess, between treatment providers, or were there things that I guess were helpful for you in terms of your communication with other soldiers, treatment providers?
We had a great every day when I was an inpatient in the hospital, they would round. So the doctors, the physical, they would all, my whole little medical team would all round together. So, every day, if I had a question, there was someone there, like I wouldn't have to go through a chain of, people, like they were actually there standing in my room for me to ask it to them. And as far as, just the military aspect of it, not only like losing a limb, but there's so many other aspects, like being discharged from the military and like the medical board you have to go through. And like, that's so foreign to someone who's never gone through it. And I never had. So the communications between the other soldiers, or who, like if I didn't know what I was doing or who to talk to, I just asked the person next to me, and well, they did it last week and you go see this person. So, yes, I would say communication was pretty great.
Yeah. Well, and again, it sounds like you had other kind of reference points or people that you could speak to help you navigate some of the uncertainties.
Yeah.
Would that be?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I guess just more broadly, is that, would you say for someone who experiences an injury, that just sort of having, other individuals or maybe specific sources of support is important for managing the uncertainty of recovery?
I would say that is one of the most important things. Yes.
Yeah. How did you know that, I guess when you started to train, maybe you can talk a little bit about this process of, you've decided to resume athletic endeavors. Maybe you can talk about how that decision was made. And
I mentioned that I'd always been an athlete. So when I was younger, I was a big gymnast. I dreamed of going to the Olympic Games, and I'd always loved sports and just the feeling of being on a playing field or in a race, whatever it was. So one of the big things I wanted to do, I knew I wanted to get back into athletics, but I didn't know how, and I didn't know, if I still could. I didn't really know what was out there. And a few minutes into my time at Walter Reed, someone came and put this presentation on about the U.S. Paralympics. And I sat in a room, like this conference room, and listened as this man said to me, or said to all of us, there's this event called the Paralympic Games. It's for athletes with physical disabilities. If you train hard enough, you compete at the world's biggest athletic stage. Same location, same venues as the Olympic Games. I mean, it was like I had a second chance. I mean, I dreamt of being an Olympian, and here I was listening to this guy tell me that I had a second chance of being of competing for representing our country. So I left that meeting knowing that somehow, some way, I was going to be a Paralympian, and then decided soon after I was going to try first off in the sport of swimming, and kind of went from there.
Yeah, and why swimming?
Swimming I did it a little bit for rehab at Walter Reed. They had a pool in the hospital, and I just loved the feel of the water. The water just, to me, had a healing effect. I mean, I almost forgot like I was missing my leg when I got in it. It just made me feel whole again. Mm-hmm. So, and not to mention, I randomly, I love the smell of chlorine, which is so random, but it kind of got me to the pool. So, so yeah, that's why.
Yeah. So it sounds like listening to that presentation was kind of a changing moment.
Oh, that was a life-changing moment, yes.
Yeah. And maybe you can talk a little bit, Melissa, about the role then that sport, if any, played in kind of facilitating your recovery, because now it sounds like you're not just trying to recover for day-to-day activities, but to compete in a Paralympics.
Sport I proudly live a life of sport, and I think sport I think changed the trajectory of my recovery. And I think first you start out wondering if you'll be able to be an athlete again. And then you hear about these events like, every Tuesday night in front of the hospital, we're all going to meet and ride our bike. And you're like, I don't know how to ride a bike with one leg. And they're like, oh, well, we have a bike. You're going to ride it with your arms. So you start out every Tuesday night, you go down, you ride a bike with your arms. And it kind of graduates. Or there was a trip, we're going to go skiing in Colorado. Well, I can't still ski. I only have one leg. And they're like, well, come on out and we'll teach you. And then you go to Colorado, and 5 days later, you're flying down the mountain on one leg. And I mean, sports it gave me self-confidence. It gave me self-worth. It showed me how much ability was in my disability. It proved to me that I should never say I shouldn't do something until I try it. I mean, it really proved to me that just because I'm missing a leg doesn't mean that I can't get out there on the same race course as able-bodied athletes and be out there with them. I mean, it truly changed the trajectory of my recovery.
Yeah, it sounds like it really opened your mind to things you could do. And, initially from what you were saying, you mentioned, I can't, I have one leg, I can't ski or ride the bike. And it sounds like through these experiences, you were open to all these possibilities or different opportunities and experiences. Yeah. Was there other ways, I guess, maybe in terms of social interactions through sport that were valuable for your recovery or since, I guess?
I think that the team part of it. So, I mentioned I went skiing out in Colorado a few months after I lost my leg, and I went out there with 20 other wounded soldiers. Some of us had skied before, some people hadn't, but here we were all trying to learn how to ski again. And you kind of go through this whole week-long process of you're all on the bunny slopes together. That first day, you don't really know what you're doing. You're wobbling and falling all over the place. And then at the end of the week, you look at the bottom of the hill, and there's all these wheelchairs and all these prosthetic legs lined up. And it's it's the most amazing sight, because that means that those soldiers are now up on the mountain coming down. So it's that camaraderie part of it. So I think just having the team. I mean, even now at the Paralympic Games, being able to have that team that I'm there with and we compete together, and it just adds so much to it.
Yeah. I guess, how did you know that you were ready to start competing? Like, I guess, or maybe you can talk about what some of your first competitions were in swimming, for instance.
Yeah. So swimming, I mean, I'd always been a swimmer, but obviously never with one leg, and trying to learn how to dive off the blocks with one leg and do a flip turn and push off the wall with one leg. I mean, I would enter competitions where I was the only amputee there and everyone else had all of their limbs. So it was, I got over it pretty quickly that I was the only one that had a disability, but I think that kind of like pushed me forward a little bit. Like, yeah, I started out a little bit hesitant because I didn't know what people would think about me without my leg. And, it just, by the end of, a few months, I was who I was. And that just kind of, I think that to kind of help me out, like as kind of the years went on, like if people can look if they want, but that's just who I am. And it's just, I'm just going to deal with it and kind of move on.
Did you, so over time, you kind of thought less maybe about how other people were perceiving you or what they were thinking about? Would that be accurate?
Yes. Like early on, I mean, it was so new. I mean, even now, I wear shorts when it's hot. I mean, everyone does. And I walk around and of course people look and I get questions or, kids point and stare. And I used to care. And now it's so much a part of it. If I had time, I stop and talk to the kids. I show them a cool trick my leg does, or, sometimes I feel bad because I'm in a rush and I can't stop and talk to everyone that wants to ask about it. But yeah, it's just, I mean, I'm proud of how I lost my leg, and I've been able to do more with one than I ever would have with two. So yeah, I'm proud of it.
Yeah. So how would you say that there have been benefits? I don't know if that's the right word or not, but
losing, I would say the benefits is learning how to deal with obstacles that come your way that you never expect, where a lot of us are living in that right now in this world. Knowing that the tough times don't last, like we'll get through them. I think I've learned that firsthand. I've learned the importance of a team. I've learned, that we shouldn't take life for granted. I think you kind of learn those things after going through such a traumatic event.
Yeah. Are there factors that seem to distinguish, you mentioned that term trajectory earlier, the trajectory that an athlete takes in terms of their recovery? You talked the fact that some people really struggle or never do accept an injury. And maybe some athletes are able to resume life activities or get involved in new activities or return to a high level. Are there, in your mind, factors that distinguish the trajectory that an individual takes after an injury?
I think some of it comes from within, obviously. I mean, you have to have the wherewithal within to choose that trajectory. I do think a lot of it has to do with the people around you. I mean, I've talked about that. I feel like I've mentioned that, a dozen times so far, but just having that support system, it was unfortunate at the hospital. I was fortunate to have my family and friends by my side, and some soldiers had no one. They had us, they had fellow soldiers, and they had the doctors and the nurses, but they had no family there or no friends there. And I think that I can't imagine that. I mean, that's got to be pretty difficult. Right. So I do think that definitely played a part. I also think taking chances, seeing a flyer up on the wall that says there's a ski trip, and instead of just, saying, oh, I could never do that, actually taking the chance, signing up for it and trying it, like going out and trying it, and then realizing that not only can you do it, but you're pretty good at it and you enjoy it, and it kind of becomes this new outlet for you. So.
Mm-hmm. So you've kind of alluded to my last question, but I'm wondering if there's any advice that you could offer to an injured athlete, and if so, what might that be?
The advice to an injured athlete is that it gets better. I think that's advice number one. It's like, I think when something happens, you think you're in this moment forever, but you're not. Like, it does get better. And it's so easy to after every physical therapy session or every, at night you lay down to bed and you think about, oh man, I still had, a month before I can get up and walk or run again, or, I went to physical therapy and my knee still hurts, but we find the negative parts so easily, but to try to find like the positive parts about it, like, because we focus on the negative, but think about in the physical therapy session, how maybe if it's a knee injury, you could straighten your knee, 2 degrees more. I mean, it's 2 degrees, but those little things add up to a big difference at the end. So I think finding the positive things, even though they're small, is important. I mean, in life, but as an injured athlete, as an athlete, for sure. And then obviously finding a team, finding people that, will get through the hard times and be there with you when it all gets better, because it will get better.
Yeah. And you mentioned, Melissa, it's like when you kind of find those small things and recognize them, it sounded like that helped build your confidence over time in yourself and your abilities.
Definitely. I mean, small things add up to a big difference. And I didn't really realize that as much as at first, but as life goes on, we can talk about it with injuries and, recovery, but it's everything. It's everything in life, right? I mean, small little things they seem little, but they can add up to such a big difference.
Yeah. Do you feel like you sort of geared your mind in a way to be more observant to those small positive things?
Yeah, I have. Yes, definitely. And I think when friends are struggling with something, I'm probably like the annoyingly optimistic friend that's like, well, at least you did this, and when they want to do, 800 other things. But I do think it helps. I mean, I like to try to help other people find those small things that are good also.
Yeah. Well, on that note, thank you for your time, and I appreciate your insights and sharing your experiences.
Great.
Thank you so much for speaking with me.
Yeah, thank you.